morning. Thank you for joining us online. We appreciate you doing that so much. We want you to know that as long as you feel the need to worship online, that's great. When you're ready to join us here at First Temple, we're ready. So we'd love for you to come some Sunday soon and worship with us here in the classic service at 8 or 9:30, or in the modern service at 9:30 or 11. And welcome to all of you who are in the room today. Thank you for coming. We appreciate you doing that so much. You know, we live in a world that is increasingly diverse and complex. Many of us grew up when there were only 4 TV stations, right? And if it were one of the national political conventions, it was a blown deal because it was on every one of the 4 channels. Now we have 4 different ways or more to access thousands of channels. And it used to be that when we went to order coffee, the option was cream and sugar, and that was it. Now you walk into a place and it's hard to even find anything on the menu that has caffeine in it. And we used to go to Whataburger and it was like all the way or 1 meat or 2, and that was the only option that we had. Now it's like you go to Whataburger and they ask you, what, a burger? A burger? That's what you want? I mean, it's just we live in this day and time when things are completely diverse and all these options. And I have to tell you, I think it's because we have this tendency as humans to add to plus. And it's because we are made in God's image, and God's supernatural design and created order is one of incredible, unending diversity and complexity. And this morning, as we study kingdom values, we're going to talk about the value of diversity. And we want you to know, we think diversity is something to be celebrated. It's a great thing. And I want us to pick up the text in 1 Peter chapter 2 and look at that this morning. So open up the church app or open up a copy of God's Word and look with me at 1 Peter chapter 2, the same passage we've been in for several weeks now. We'll continue through this series. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 10, and then we're going to go down to verse 17. So the value of diversity, God's supernatural created order. Peter writes, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. For you once were not a people, but now you are the people of God. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." Now, go all the way down to verse 17. Now, we're going to fill in some of those other verses we've been reading every week in the next couple of weeks, but today I want to go all the way down to verse 17, where he says, "With all of this, honor everyone. Love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king." What I want you to see in this text today is the call for us to value diversity. Let's unpack it a little bit. Let's look back in verses 9 and 10 at some of those words and phrases that Peter has been using. We've been reading for several weeks now. He uses several synonyms. There are words in here like race and ethnicity and people group and language group. But what he does is he adds kingdom modifiers to them. Like this: you are a chosen race, a hand-picked generation. You're a holy nation, an ethnos, an ethnicity that has been set apart for the purposes of God. You're a people for God's own possession, a peculiar, distinct, stand out in the crowd kind of people that you're identified because you belong to God. And then finally he says, you were once not a people, but now you are the people of God. What he is referring to is that in spite of all of our earthly identifiers and monikers, ultimately, we have now been identified as a new people group, the people of God. Now, the challenge with that is that we human beings have this tendency about us called homogeneity. What that means is we like, prefer, and are drawn to those who are like we are. It's just the nature of humanity. In fact, just hang with me for a second. It's not a white tendency. It's not even an American tendency or a black or Hispanic tendency. It is a global context of humanity in that every culture and people group in the world prefers to be around people who are like they are. There are about 16,000 people groups identified in the Earth's population. There are about 6,500 languages, and all of us identify with and prefer people who are like we are. That's human nature. And yet, what Peter is doing here is telling us that God is calling us to a new homogeneity that is superior to, supersedes, transcends, and is above all of those earthly identifiers and monikers that we see ourselves as. Let's read it again. You are a hand-picked generation, a royal priesthood, an ethnos, ethnicity, nation set apart, a people peculiar for God's own possession. You once were not a people, now you are the people of God. Verse 17, and so honor, celebrate, measure as equal all people, every one. So there's this call for us to recognize that even within our unity as one, being the people of God, we are still diverse. We're made up of all different kinds of people groups and language groups and ethnicities and nations and all of that. And there's indication that we don't lose those identifiers and those monikers, even in the hereafter, even in heaven. Keep your place in 1 Peter. Look over in Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, where John receives this revelation from God, and he writes it out about what it's going to be like when we get to heaven. And we all, as believers, gather around the throne of God and worship him. And here's what it says in Revelation 7, verses 9 and 10. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from, get it, every nation and all tribes and all peoples and all tongues were standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they were crying out with a loud voice, saying, salvation to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Go back up to those phrases in verse 9. Every nation, all tribes and peoples and tongues. There will still be that kind of earthly identification even in the hereafter. I'm going to be standing there as a dark-haired Irishman who grew up in America, a Texan no less, who just like most Irishmen goes to tan, but instead just burns and peels, burns and peels, burns and peels. That's the way my life is. Well, we're going to be identified by that. And I want you to see this in verse 9. Every nation, all tribes, all peoples, all tongues. Guess which words he's using there in this description of the revelation John receives from God? The same words Peter is using in his verse 9 over in 1 Peter chapter 2. Ethnos, race, nation, people groups, language groups. The difference is Peter's putting the kingdom moniker or identifier, modifier on them. That's the only distinction. Now, we run into problems because sometimes we like to think of it this way. We would like to think that the right answer is to say, well, I don't see race, I don't see skin color, I just see people. Well, here's the challenge with that. According to Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, it tells us that actually God sees color, skin color. In fact, God made skin color. I wonder sometimes if anybody's ever identified how many different shades of color there are in humanity globally, the different skin tones. I'm considered white, but I'm really more of a rosy mauve. That's really what I am. If I go to the paint store and find my color, that's really what I am. You laughing at me or with me? Come on now. All right. So I think God, in part of his rich, diverse created order, made all these different varieties of skin colors. I just think that's what God did because that's what he does. I mean, look in the plant kingdom. Scientists have identified so far to date 391,000 species of flowering plants. About 2,000 are discovered every year, new, which means that there are varieties and species that have not been discovered yet. In fact, some will never be discovered. God made them just for his own pleasure in his diverse, created, supernatural way for his own eye to see, knowing that no human eye would ever see that creation. I bet there are even some fish in the sea that even Jonathan doesn't know about and hasn't seen, which gives him motivation to go and catch them. This idea of diversity. I want you to see a couple of examples of flowering plants. Here's the stinking corpse lily. It's one of the 3 national flowers of Indonesia. It's the largest bloom on the planet that's been discovered so far. That bloom is 3 feet wide. And it gets its name, stinking corpse lily, because at its fullest bloom, it gives off the aroma of rotting flesh. Well, okay, let's do this one. It's a little more appealing. This is jade vine. It's a claw-shaped vine that's unique to the rainforest of the Philippines. It comes in shades of blue and teal and light green and all in that part of the color spectrum. And its greatest pollinators are bats. God's creative design is incredibly diverse. And we at First Temple value that diversity. We celebrate it. We do what Peter says. We honor, we celebrate, we consider as equal everyone, especially in God's creation of humanity. We want to reflect here at First Temple the community we've been given to serve and minister to and love. We want more and more, and we're seeking God's help, that as we are seen by our community, that they see a reflection of themselves in the diversity out there that now is becoming here. I don't know if you know this or not, but right now in the state of Texas, as well in Bell County, there is no racial ethnic majority. Whites make up less than 50%, even here in Bell County. We have a number of different language groups here in our county. Belton ISD identifies, in addition to English, 9 other languages that students in their school district speak at home. Got them listed right there. I discovered after we made the slides that Temple ISD has 23 different languages in addition to English. Now, that's not Houston that has 195, okay? But I will tell you, the world is coming to Texas. And there is this richness in diversity, and it's so exciting to see that happen. The world is coming here. And they say that by the year 2050, 85% of the population in Texas, including those who are coming from all over the world, 85% of our population will live in a triangle from Dallas to Houston on I-45, Houston to San Antonio on I-10, and San Antonio to Dallas on I-35. And guess who's right in the middle of that side of that triangle? We are. That's very exciting. So we see this idea of diversity in us reflecting in our community as a very valuable thing and something to seek after and ask God to help us do. There's gender diversity more and more in our church. You know, 50% of the population is female, 50% is male here in Bell County. And more we're seeing women rise up. We're listening to them, we're empowering them, and we are valuing their leadership among us. Right now, we have 3 standing committees at First Temple. We have the stewardship, personnel, and committee on committees. I mean, we're Baptists, so we have a committee on committees, right? We got to, okay? It's part of the national anthem of Baptists, okay? We got to have committee on committees. And all 3 chairpersons are women right now in our church. We just last year elected our very first ever female trustee. You've been seeing women fill the pulpit some. You're going to see that more. As we go out and seek to fill open positions for our pastors and ministers, we're going to be seeking the top candidate and ask God to bring us the very best person that can be. We're also asking God that if he could see fit, it'd be great if that top candidate were a person of a color or a woman. We think that would be great to help us value this diversity. There's other diversity. There's socioeconomic levels. There's different kinds of families. You've got the single parent. You've got the blended family. You've got the married couple. You've got a generational family where grandparents and aunts and uncles are raising their kids' kids. We've got foster families and adopted families and homeless families. The question is, are we doing things in such a way here at First Temple that people feel like they have to be married and have 2.1 children to fit in here at First Temple? We've got to continually seek after and value this diversity. It's so important. Now, one of the challenges is that those of us, if we're human, we have this tendency toward homogeneity. So we always think we've got to get them to be more like us. We're not going to adapt to them. They've got to adapt to us. And we feel like that, that's the idea that it's fine for them to live with us in our neighborhoods, it's fine for them to share a community, it's fine for them to come and share worship with us at church, but they've got to adapt to the way we are. Because we think that our identity is the one that everybody is supposed to be homogenous about. And we even see that in our style of worship. Did you know if you really broke down about 99.9% of what we do at First Temple, it screams out loud, white, suburban, American church. Even in the length of worship services that we are accustomed to. And then if we go over an hour, oh boy, problem city. Can I share something with you? My black pastor friends are appalled at how short I preach. And you think I go long, and I do. I'm already over time for today. The little clock back there is in yellow back there, which says I'm over time, all right? We won't even mention about what they think about how I dress, defiling the sanctuary of God. Truth is, when I was working for the BGCT in Dallas, Texas Baptist, and I traveled the state to preach in all kinds of different ethnic churches, I had about 5 or 6 different preacher, quote, uniforms that I would wear depending on where I went. Just about everything we do, the songs that we sing, and we have this idea, well, if they love Jesus enough, they'll like the songs that I like. And they'll appreciate and prefer the preacher that I prefer. And fill in the blank. And what that is that's that human, earthly, but human tendency towards homogeneity, where we think that people have to adapt and become more and more like we are. And yet, here's the thing. I really hope you'll hear this from your heart, because I'm trying to speak this from my heart today. Not from my head, from my heart. We are not called to get them to come more like us. We are collectively together called to become more and more like Christ. The thing that makes us all the same, regardless of the earthly monikers and identities, is that we were once in the darkness and now we are in the light. We've all come from the same place. And because of the work of Christ in our lives, no one gets to tell us to go back where we came from. So this morning, as we seek to value diversity, I want to challenge you with about 3 action steps. 1, let's open our eyes. Let's watch for, identify, and celebrate when we discover someone who is different. When you're in the checkout line at your favorite place to shop and you hear someone speaking a different language, what is your thought? Is it judgment or is it celebration? Celebrate diversity. Secondly, open our lives. Open our lives. Seek to develop relationships with those who are different. In fact, when you're in the checkout line and you hear a different language, what would it be for like you to go, hey, that is a beautiful language. Can you tell me what that language is? I have no clue what it is. And where is the nation it's from? What continent is that language most spoken in? Tell me a little bit about your country. Tell me a little bit about your homeland. Just tell me that. And just engage them in conversation. If you're white, I'm going to give you warning. All kinds of red flags are going to show up and go off in their hearts and minds, and they're thinking you're up to some sort of agenda. So be careful with that question. Last year in the Both And series, we gave you the assignment to go and build relationships with those who are different. Do you need to kind of dust that goal off and pick it up where you left it off and seek to do that more? If we're going to honor, if we're going to celebrate, if we're going to hold as equal all people, then we will open our eyes and open our lives to build relationships with them. Thirdly, let's open our hearts and be willing to ask ourselves tough questions. When you see someone who's different, do you automatically assume they need Jesus? You know, whenever we reach out and try to help someone who's poor, one of the things that those of us who have automatically assume is that we also have to share the gospel with them because they're poor. They must need Jesus. And can I share something? They probably are a lot closer to Jesus than you and I are. They've had to live at a much more dependent level than you and I think we have to live on Jesus because we have the safety net of our own means. Another tough question for us to ask. It's okay for them to live in our neighborhood. It's okay for them to shop where we shop, go to school where our kids go to school. It's okay for them to even come to First Temple. It's even okay for our church to diversify its ministers and pastor staff. That's awesome. But the question is, could that person that's different become your son-in-law? Or your brother-in-law? Final question. What is God putting his finger on in your life right now in this subject of valuing diversity? He probably is doing that. It may even be in that area where there was something in the worship service earlier or even in this message was kind of an ouch moment. It's probably the finger of God putting it on your life to say, I want that. I want that. In fact, let me just ask you to bow your heads, close your eyes. Even at home, would you do that? Would you just bow your heads where you are and maybe just quietly, privately reflect? What is God putting his finger on that says, I need you, I want that out of your life? It's part of darkness, not light, especially in this area of diversity and valuing it, honoring everyone. Would you let God do more than just put his finger on it? Would you let him grab it and take it out of your life? Because you belong to him. Gary, lead us in some song. Thank you.